Hello, this is Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis. It is the end of March here in Austin, Texas, so it's well into spring. We're getting very warm. Today is about 80 degrees or so outside. In fact, I've been starting to slowly put my orchid collection outside because it is so warm and the threat of freezing is really gone. But today I want to talk a little bit more about catasetums, Catasetinae care in general. So if you recall, my first video was about potting catasetums using the PET method. Today will be more just a general care video. Before I get into the general care, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and why I believe that I can make videos like this and pass on the knowledge that I've gained over time. It seems like a lot of folks on YouTube and other platforms may or may not have been growing a certain group of orchids for very long, and then they're sort of promoting themselves as an expert. I want to let you know that I've been growing the Catasetum group since about 2006 or 2007. You know, it's 2019 now, so I've got quite a bit of experience under my belt, and I really want to pass this knowledge on that a lot of other folks have given me over the years, or stuff that I've learned. But in any case, here it is. So overall, as you probably know, if you're watching this video, you're probably interested in catasetums. You probably at least know that these guys, that this group is fairly deciduous in that you have to water them strongly or intensely for about half the year, and then about the other half of the year you don't have to water them at all. So let's start with that. Let's start with the watering regime. So here in Texas, I will typically start withholding water around mid-November up until this coming fall, so fall of 2019. I've always had them outside during the warm season and then come inside during the cool season. I'm setting up a greenhouse right now, so that will no longer be the case. But anyway, I typically start withholding water around mid-November, and then if everything hasn't dropped its leaves, to bring it inside in order to save space, I used to cut the leaves off, and that doesn't really have any negative effects. I know there's people out there that say if you cut the leaves off, that's somehow going to negatively impact the plants, or you should always, always, always let the plant tell you when it wants to go dormant, and that's okay. If you have the space to do that, great. If you were like me and you didn't have the space, then cutting the leaves off it is perfectly acceptable. And then I don't really water typically until Memorial Day. So you'll see significant bulb shriveling. So even before then, actually, you'll see the leaves fall off, and a lot of folks start getting worried that the leaves are falling off, they're turning yellow, and everything's dying. That's not true. That the plants are just shutting down, going to sleep, and then they start to wake up. In February, March, April, you'll see a little teeny tiny nubbins coming out, and those teeny tiny nubbins will turn into large plants, and the bulbs will shrivel extensively very often, and that's fine. Once you start watering again, those bulbs will fatten back up. So as I said earlier, it's the end of March here. I don't have a whole lot of growth, but I do want to show you this plant. This is Catasetum Jesse Ang, and you can see it's got a pretty big growth here on the front. So it's usually around this stage when people start posting questions online and saying, hey, can I water? Can I water? First of all, if you are asking whether or not you should water, it's not time to water. If your growth is about this big, so you can see how big it is compared to my hand, it's not time to water. The really important thing when observing these guys and figuring out when to water, don't even pay attention to the growth. The growth is completely irrelevant. It's the roots. The roots You can see some root tips in there. Hopefully you can see that. If you can't, I'll tell you, there's root tips there. And these guys are not nearly long enough for any kind of water. So I'll consider watering when I start to see the roots getting well down into the pot. So 4 inches minimum, that's the bare minimum. If you can go longer and let those roots get all the way down into the bottom, that's really good. The problem with watering too soon is that this particular group of orchids is designed in such a way that when those root tips, if they're small, if they start hitting moist media, they just stop growing. So as you probably know, you need a great root system to create a great plant which will put out great blooms. So you really have to let those roots get all the way down into the media before you're even considering watering. Again, don't focus on the leaves, focus on the roots. When those roots are minimum 4 inches long, then you can think about start watering. I mean, if you can get the roots growing all the way down through the pot, that's even better. This bulb will probably shrink to about half of what you see here, and that freaks a lot of people out. They say, oh, I mean, a lot of people would look at this bulb and start to worry. You don't need to worry. Like I said, this can get even, half as big as it is now, and it'll bounce back right away. In that first week or two of watering, this bulb will go, and it'll be big and fat again, and the roots will be nice and long. They'll have grown down into the media, and the plant will be well on its way to having a big growth, which will lead to a big bloom. So now that we have initial watering out of the way, some people like to talk about watering slowly for the first month and then really pouring it on, and that's fine. As I showed you in my last video, I have the PET method. So as soon as I start watering, I'm going to get a water well that builds up here, and so this will just be sitting in water for basically as soon as I start watering. So slowly ramping up your watering is fine, but I think that if you have a big giant new root system in there, you can really water pretty much full bore fairly early on. But to play it safe, especially if you're just learning about this group, let's say that you start watering a little bit for a week or two, and then a little more, and a little more, and a little more, until finally, after about a month, you will not have any. The media will not go dry. It'll stay fairly moist, but not totally soaking, dripping wet. You want to have lots of air circulation in there. You want to have it fairly wet, and it shouldn't really dry out for that first, during the growing season, until basically you start withholding water. Fertilizing during the growth phase is heavy, heavy, heavy. If you're a Cattleya grower or Phalaenopsis grower, you're used to a certain level of fertilizer application. These guys will really, you could almost double it for this particular plant, for the Catasetums. And that's because whereas a Phalaenopsis or a Cattleya will grow continuously, maybe all year round, maybe even 9 months out of the year, these guys are really only growing extensively for 4 to 7 months. So they have a very short window with which they need to grow. They need to absorb as much water and nutrients as possible, and they need to crank out that new growth before they go dormant again. And then of course they have to flower, so they need a lot of nutrients in a very short amount of time. So don't be afraid to really pour the fertilizer on. The type of fertilizer is not really important. I like to use time release, and to me, I find the time release is great. It holds up well during the heat of summer here in Texas outside, and you have to be very careful about what type of fertilizer you use if you're going to do time release. Some of the time release types will just sort of melt in heat, whereas others hold up very well. Most people use liquid fertilizer in that they'll take some little canister, they'll mix it in water, and just apply it every 1 or 2 weeks, or however often the directions indicate. And that's fine. That works great. Just whatever type of fertilizer you're using, just use a lot of it. Media. Media is not that important, actually. You need a type of media that holds on to the water and stays moist in your particular environment. I think the most common type of media that people typically use is long fiber sphagnum. Maybe put some peanuts or some rocks or something in the bottom to keep a little air circulation in the bottom of the pot, but then the rest of the pot will be long fiber sphagnum moss. You can also try the PET method. You can use bark as long as you can keep that bark wet. I've heard of people growing their catasetums in horse manure or cow manure. Cocoa chips work. These guys will grow in just about anything. Don't sweat it. I think the most common one is long fiber sphagnum, and that if you're just starting out, that's probably your best bet. Light. This particular group likes a lot of light. So if you are familiar with growing Cattleyas, that's sort of that's a good amount of light. If you can grow Cattleyas well and you're blasting with light like I do, you can probably transfer that same level of brightness to your Catasetums, or even brighter. Believe it or not, it's really tough to give these guys too much light. Burning the leaves can be a problem, of course, once you start pushing those light levels, but if you can find that great balance where you're cranking out or you're just blasting these guys with as much light as they'll absolutely take, do it. Just short of burning. A light green colored leaf is really what you're looking for. So I like to grow my Catasetums in sunlight, very bright sunlight here in Texas, which is very easy to do. There's a lot of sun here. I know there are some people out there who maybe live in northern climates, or for whatever reason they want to grow Catasetums under lights. That's very, very doable. These guys are well. It's a group that will do very well under lights. In fact, Bernie Butts up in Toronto, Canada, grows all of his collection exclusively under lights in a basement, I believe, and I gotta say he has some of the best looking plants I've ever seen for anyone anywhere, really. And so it's very possible, and it's good to do if you don't have the space, or for whatever reason you don't have sunlight access for your plants. So growing under lights is perfectly acceptable and can bring you great success. I would say the only problem with growing under lights is that you are probably space limited. So maybe having some of the larger varieties, some of the big Cloasetums or Cloaceas, Fred Clarkiaras, whatever, that might be difficult. But if space isn't a problem, growing under lights is perfectly acceptable. And I don't think you can burn these guys under lights unless the leaves are actually getting too close to the bulbs themselves, at which time you aren't burning your plants because of bright light, you're burning your plants because of too much heat. Something else that people like to talk about is how much light intensity will give you a certain type of flowers. So as many of you know, a lot of the plants, or the Catasetinae, especially the Catasetums and the Cycnokes, are hermaphroditic. So they can throw male flowers, they can throw female flowers. They look very different a lot of the time from each other, and people typically want to know how to get male flowers. One of the things that has gone around for many years is that if you grow your plant in very, very, very bright light, it will give you female flowers, and if you give more shady conditions, it will give you male flowers. And like I said, male flowers are typically more desirable. I have found that that is maybe true. I think the plant size plays a greater role in whether or not it's going to throw male or female flowers. A big, fat, mature, happy plant is more predisposed to throwing female flowers. And the reason is that if you are going to grow a seed pod, you need to have the resources to not only grow the seed pod, but to grow that seed pod during a period where you might not be getting any water for 6 months. So if you're a small plant and you don't have a whole lot of resources, or you don't have a whole lot of big bulbs built up, you're going to throw male flowers, so the bee comes along, gets the pollen, and your gametes are out in the world. You are now you've now done your part as a plant. Whereas if you are a big giant female, you're going to have the pollen coming to you so that you can create your own seeds. And so the idea that light plays a role in catasetum male or females, it's possible, but most likely it's the size of the plant or the health of the plant. A small plant can throw female flowers if that plant is very, very well taken care of, although it's less likely to do so. Temperatures. The temperatures for catasetums are not really that important. I know people who grow these guys in moderate temperatures, 75, 80 degrees. I personally grow my catasetums outside in Austin, Texas, which means there's a lot of heat. And these guys love it, love it, love it, love it, absolutely love it. I would say, I believe that 2018 we saw 52 days of temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I saw a post during that time that I think it was someone in Germany was worried about his plants that were growing outside because the temperatures were getting above 85 degrees. I said, look, you've got at least another 20 degrees before you even start worrying about temperature intolerance or negatively affecting the plants. These guys are typically from fairly warm tropical areas of Central and South America, and they do very well in the Texas heat of 105 degrees for months at a time. That's not a problem. A few more tips that I want to talk about, or things to watch out for. I know that people are asking a lot of the time, hey, my growth is kind of squishy here. It's turned yellow. What's going on? Is that rot? It's not rot. So this particular plant I got from a friend of mine here in Texas, and he said that these two newer growths just didn't grow the way he wanted it. That's why it's smaller than this growth. So I'm taking charge of this guy right now. But what's happened here is, it's the end of March. This guy hasn't seen any water since mid-November. It is not a large plant, as you can see. The species is Catasetum saccatum, so this will be one of the larger species. So this is a young plant, and through the dormancy, this particular bulb, for whatever reason, I don't fully understand it, has decided that it is going to give up its resources to feed the plant. So some people will recommend that you rip these yellow bulbs off because they're squishy. I don't see any reason for that. In fact, I would imagine that would be, if anything, there will be a negative consequence, or there will be a negative action for your plant. So all the nutrients that are in this bulb are going into the rest of the plant. So there's no reason to pull this off. In fact, now that I think about it, if you look at this other plant, that's what happened to these bulbs. So a year or two ago, this was the same color as this, and it shriveled It donated its resources to the rest of the plant, and now it's garbage. You can see that there's another one like that as well. When it's ready to pop off, you can rip it off fairly easily and just get rid of it. It's kind of unattractive. So if you see this color, this sort of yellowish color, it's okay. Let it be. Let those nutrients go to the rest of the plant. Now, if you have a bulb that's soft and squishy and turning black, that means you probably have a problem, and you may consider ripping it off or doing some kind of surgery to see if that black rot has gotten into the rest of the plant. And hopefully it hasn't. But if it has, sometimes it happens. Sometimes you got to do a little surgery. Another thing that I'd like to talk about is people get very worked up about their plants. They get very scared that their plant is going to die. And this is true for all orchid growers. Doesn't matter what genus you grow, what type of orchids. I want to let you know that you don't have to worry if your plant dies. You are not going to get in any kind of trouble. And I will tell you right now that the best growers have killed lots and lots and lots of plants. We had John Odom come to our Orchid Society a couple years ago, and he was saying, hey, I think he actually said that he believes he's the largest Cattleya producer in the United States. I don't know if that's true or not, but he does say that he has probably killed more Cattleyas than any other human being that he knows of, and that makes him a good grower. And it's true. You don't really learn that much from plants that grow and do well. You learn the most from the plants that you've killed. And I will tell you, I've killed a lot of Catasetums, lots of Cycnokes, lots of Cloaceas and hybrids, and it's just part of the game. Don't worry about it. If you're new to the group, and when I say new to the group, maybe new to growing Catasetums, new to growing Catasetinae, start with something easy. Start with a complex intergeneric hybrid, a Fred Clark Yara or a Monnier Yara, and go through the motions, learn about dormancy, learn about the brightness of the light, experiment. I hate to say it, but use your new plant as sort of a test case or a guinea pig to see how you can keep this plant alive under these particular conditions, and then maybe start to jump off into some of the more complex, or not complex, the species or that take a little more care or a little more delicate or a little more finicky, and slowly work your way up to some of these species that give even some of the expert growers a little trouble. Don't start off with a Catasetum denticulatum. Don't start off by importing your plants from South America. Start off by getting your plants from Fred Clark at Sunset Valley Orchids or Stephen Moffat over at Rare Earth Orchids or wherever, just eBay. Lots of people are selling, or your local orchid society, whatever. Just start buying plants, start growing them, start killing them, start replacing them, and then eventually over time that trial and error will really pay off, and you'll start to have small plants, bigger plants, basically plants that are growing well, and start posting your pictures online, and let me know if you have questions. Bye.